You're listening to the Identity at the Center podcast. This is the show that talks about identity and access management and making sure you know who has access to what. Let's get started. Welcome to the Identity at the Center podcast. I'm Jeff, and that's Jim. Hey, Jim.
Hey, Jeff. How's it going?
Not so bad. Yourself?
I am ready to start traveling again. I mean, I know we've talked about this. The funny thing was, I used to be the first guy to get burnt out from being on the road too much, and I would consider us road warriors. But now it's been a year. I mean, we're coming up on the 1-year anniversary where you and I were out at a client, and they sent us home, or they sent us back to the hotel and said, "Don't come in tomorrow." So it's been a year that we've been in this pandemic. So that we have not traveled in that entire time. We've not traveled for business, and I'm ready, man. I miss it.
Yeah, I feel the same. And I guess we should point out it was not because of anything we did from a client perspective, right? They closed the offices and sent us back to our hotels for the last day of some meetings that we had. So shout out to Jason and Connie if you guys are listening. Hopefully it wasn't us. Although I did have allergies the day before, which
that's right, you did.
That was terrible timing to have allergies. And I told her, so like, I even offered, I was like, hey, this is just allergies, I promise you. But if you want me to work from the hotel, I'm happy to do it. And we powered through the rest of the day. And then the next day, they ended up closing all their offices. And that was really kind of the beginning of the lockdown, I think, for a lot of folks. And that was in DC at that point. So I was supposed to be in Atlanta actually the following week. So that was a Thursday. And I was supposed to be in Atlanta on Monday. And over the weekend, everything just kind of emergency just got shut down. We stopped all travel. And that was it. So yeah, I'm looking forward to get on the road again when it's safe to do so. And I'm glad you brought that up because that ties in pretty well with one of the things we want to talk about, which is Identiverse. So maybe we just kind of we'll tease that a little bit because I think there's a component there that people might be interested in that's happening later this year. We'll just leave it at that for right now.
Okay, we'll leave it at that.
Why don't we introduce our guest, because we have a very interesting topic that I personally find of great interest. So I'm probably going to be peppering her with a bunch of questions and nagging her with a bunch of stuff. We want to start to try to introduce some other information security concepts and things that we think are interesting, but still relate to the identity management space. And one of those is penetration testing. This is something that comes up as we're having conversations with, CISOs and CIOs, and is something that comes up quite a bit as far as being able to identify weaknesses within the organization. So to help us with that conversation, I want to introduce folks to Krissy Safi. She's the Managing Director and Global Practice Leader for Attack and Penetration Testing at Protiviti. Very fortunate to have her here. Thank you so much, Krissy, for joining us.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So I'm gonna pepper you with a whole bunch of probably nerd questions at some point. But before we get into that space, one of our questions that we always like to ask folks is typically, how did you get into IAM? Now, in your case, right, we're probably talking more about information security and in specifically pen testing or penetration testing. So maybe you can walk us a little bit through, how did you get into InfoSec? And then specifically on the pen testing side, is it something that you chose or did you choose it?
Yeah, sure. So, really the long story short is InfoSec chose me. It kind of happened by accident. I was in college. I went to the University of Colorado at Boulder, and I was supposed to be a biology major. I got into my junior year at the university studying biology, and my biology lab professor noticed that I was better at fixing the lab computers than doing the actual science experiments. And so he suggested that I might want to reevaluate my career path. So he wasn't wrong. I struggled with chemistry and biology, so I switched my degree over to information systems. And I was concerned it was going to take me 6 years to do my undergrad. But I promptly got a call shortly after I changed my degree and put my resume up on the university's tracking system. I got a call from IBM about an internship opportunity doing workstation security auditing at a major site in Boulder. And I took took advantage of that opportunity, and they promised that if I just got my undergrad degree in anything, they would hire me on to the security team. And as a pen tester, I had during my internship transitioned over to the pen testing team. So I completed my degree in Italian, and IBM hired me, and that's where I got my start. Now, since then, I've had a lot of different positions in the InfoSec world. In fact, there was a short time in my career that I was working with Tivoli Identity Manager and Tivoli Access Manager, if you know those tools. I was in the offering management side, building services around how to deploy and really operationalize those tools. And that was a while back. And then I've had various positions since then. I had a short stint with the U.S. government doing embassy infrastructure security at embassies. And I most recently joined Protiviti in early 2020 as a managing director and the practice leader for our TAC and pen practice. And it's been a really great career. And I couldn't be happier for accidentally falling into this world. It's so fun. It's so interesting every day.
I think that's what a lot of us find is, you're in college for communications, or my case, political science, your case, Italian. And then what you find is, wow, I'd be a lot more employable in computers, whatever area of computers that happens to be. But security is such a great place, as we found. Now, Jeff kind of mentioned that, we obviously focus on identity and access management with this podcast. And what we thought was, look, our listenership is the IAM practitioner, kind of in air quotes. That can mean a lot of things, but folks who focus on identity and access management. And so they may, all of our listeners may have a different understanding of what penetration testing is. So let's start there. Give us, what is penetration testing? And then kind of transition into, specific to IAM. Are there any differences in terms of how you do penetration testing for IAM systems versus other systems? Or, maybe if you can just kind of provide that tie-in from penetration testing, what is it?
Yeah, absolutely. So I love talking about what is pen testing and how does identity and access play into that. They're so related. And let me explain why. So first of all, pen testing. So the more kind of generic term for what we do is offensive security or security testing. And there are different types of it. Okay. So you might do scanning on one particular target versus full manual pen testing on another target. So it really depends on things like, what does that asset or that target have from a data perspective? What could the impact be if that system was breached? So we really look at like a risk-based model when determining what type of security testing to do on a given asset or a target. Now, when we really talk about pen testing and we're talking with our clients about pen testing, it's important to understand that that is a manual security test. Okay, so it's not scanning, it's not running scanners, things like that. It really is a manual approach, and it can be done against anything. So applications, networks, mobile devices, IoT devices, pretty much anything. It could be, anything out there that especially is connected in some way that could have value to a criminal. And then in some cases, there is an element of social engineering as well to our pen testing engagements. So think things like spear phishing, putting together ruses that'll get somebody to click on a particular link and hand over credentials. So that's really how we look at pen testing and what it is. Now, from a kind of a process perspective and tools and techniques, something that's really important to recognize is that, yes, there are methodologies out there, whether it's PTES or the MITRE ATT&CK framework. A lot of firms follow those kinds of methodologies, but pen testing really is more of an art than a science. Okay. It's not a paint by number kind of process. It's really about the mindset of the person, of the tester. How does their brain work? Are they inventive? Are they curious? Are they always wanting to solve problems? Do they, they really want to know how something really works, and then kind of flip it and say, how did the designer not intend for this thing to work? And then poke at that. And, really our ultimate goal as hackers and as pen testers is, we want to identify and report on security vulnerabilities, so that the organization can fix those before a criminal finds them and uses them for personal gain.
So I'm fascinated already. I want to kind of dig into this a little bit. You mentioned a few different things. The first one being that this is more of an art than a science. And the way that I guess I kind of took that is, really trying to combine the exploits that with thorough knowledge of systems to, again, get to a result that the designer of the system did not intend. Would that be accurate?
Yeah, that's accurate. And why I said at the beginning, why there's this big identity and access part is that most of the breaches are related to the compromise of credentials, stolen passwords, things like that. So there's a very big component there. And, since that is where most breaches are starting from, or that's how they occur, it is naturally one of the first things pen testers seek out, because that's what criminals would do. Okay. So if I kind of dive into that a little bit more, it's easier to go undetected as a hacker if you can use a legitimate username and password to gain access. All right. So you might ask, how does one go about even getting access to a legitimate username and password if we're not talking about some kind of insider threat situation? We're really talking about an outside criminal. So there's a few different ways that can be accomplished. And I'm gonna keep it simple, because if we get down too much of a technical rabbit hole, I'll probably get tripped up here too. But some of the most basic ways are through brute force, so password guessing. And what's really crazy that this is still an issue is that we do a lot of what we call open source intelligence gathering. So we look at publicly available information about people, and we try to guess their passwords, because people are still using passwords like summer 2020, or one of the most common passwords right now is coronavirus 2021 or coronavirus 2020, or something with kind of what's happening in our world, even election related words, things like that. So we're able to often brute force people's passwords just by understanding the person, what are they posting out there on social media, or maybe even on LinkedIn, and then getting in that way. And then another way that is just, it's crazy, is the spear phishing. So social engineering. So how can we trick users into basically handing over their username and passwords? Okay, so one of the coolest ways that I've seen recently is with the move to being remote. If you think about like the real estate world or the building industry, salespeople are hungry to sell properties, to sell, houses, to sell new builds, whatever. And so a lot of these sites now have ways that you can interact with the sales folks or the agents via chat. And we have been able to exploit that and get these folks, these agents, to install things on their system, things like keyloggers, or then we can capture their username and passwords. So it's really fascinating. Or just, upload other kinds of malware that lets us have a foothold and pivot to other parts of their environment. And that then really gets back to, user awareness training. But we are very focused on creating the best ruses that we can out there that are so convincing, and humans are very nice. And if you can tap into, that thing that they want, whether it's to help or to buy something or sell something, we've been very successful.
It sounds to me like almost the ideal person for this role is someone who has the ability to think like a criminal, but at the same time has the moral fortitude that they're not a criminal.
Exactly. You're exactly right. I mean, attacker mindset is something you hear often when, talking to people in my industry, or when I'm looking to hire people, how does their brain work and what are their intentions?
So how does someone get into penetration testing? Is this something that requires a lot of background in the different skills? Is it something that it is the mindset more so than the skills, or maybe it's a little bit of both?
Yeah, it's a little bit of both, and I would say it's even more the mindset. So back when I was in college, there was no cybersecurity courses or things like that. There was, some SANS courses and some certifications and things like that, but you couldn't really get a college degree or a certificate in this. And so back then, it was about networking. It was about going to conferences, um, doing these online courses and things like that. These days, we're seeing, much more availability of different degrees or programs where you can, go to a educational institution, if you will, and learn. But when I'm looking for people, if it's kind of the younger generation just getting started, um, I look for passion, really. How passionate are they about this industry? What have they done on their own time? Do they have a GitHub where they have some open source information and open source tools out there? Have they been to DEF CON? Things like that. Just, have they taken, there's a ton of online free resources. So some of my favorites are like hackerhighschool.org. OWASP has a lot of different training and actual like exercises that you can go through to look at web app vulnerabilities. So for me, if it's someone that's come along or someone that's just interested in getting started, really, it's about that passion. That's what I look for, and those are some of the resources they can start to use to get up to speed and really learn and see if this is something that might be interesting to them. And then the technical stuff can come later. It's definitely important, but if you don't have the right mindset and the right passion and that curiosity going into it, I don't think you can be as successful.
I think that natural curiosity probably lends itself well to this type of role. You mentioned a few different resources that you're familiar with. One of mine is I like Reddit, and there is a subreddit called How to Hack. I'm not exactly sure what they're talking about sometimes, but I find it extremely valuable to peruse through the different topics and educate myself as much as I want to be, I guess, at this point, on some of the different paths that people are taking. So that's probably another good resource if folks are interested out there, is check out the How to Hack subreddit. I like that one. There's a lot of good stuff, and there's even tutorials, right, on how to exploit certain things, and obviously these should be done where you have permission to do so, so we don't get into trouble or anything like that. But that is definitely something, because I find it can be difficult just to keep up with the space and all the different things that are, at risk or could be at risk from different systems. It seems like there is, some 0-day exploit happening on a weekly, if not daily basis, and you're probably a lot closer to it than I would be. But what are some of the techniques that you use to kind of stay sharp in this space to be able to apply what you know with that curiosity mindset of how to break it?
Sure. Yeah. So it is challenging to stay ahead of things in this space. So actually what I've done with my organization is I have leaders in the different areas, and their job is to stay focused on, what are the latest, greatest things. So for example, I have a person who is our head of application security, a person who's head of network pen testing, someone who's the head of red teaming, someone who's the head of social engineering. And that's their job, to really stay informed, what's going on, what's the latest, are there vulnerabilities out there? I also have a tools team that weaponizes vulnerabilities that we can use on our engagements. And we, are starting to put out more thought leadership. So, when I started here at Protiviti, it was a really solid business, a great business, 15 plus years of doing pen testing. But, Protiviti wanted to take it to the next level. And so, I came in and my focuses are really on, one of the focuses I should say is really on that external promotion and making sure people know what it is that we are doing out there, and that they've heard of Protiviti and our thought leadership. And so again, I focus people in these key areas so they can stay up on the latest and greatest in that particular area. And then we have a lot of, internal like sharing of information. We do a lot of lunch and learns. We do a lot of webinars, things like that. So we're sharing information across our team as well, across, the different verticals, and into the broader security and privacy. And, people are very interested, just like you said, Jeff, in pen testing and what it is we're doing. So we never have a shortage of audience members for our topics.
So this is really interesting conversation, because kind of my mindset or my understanding of penetration testing was there's a lot more of it like automated, and maybe I was thinking of scanning and just calling that penetration testing. So I'm going to combine a couple of questions here. But one is, so when should organizations be doing penetration testing? It seems like there's almost a value to doing it 365 days a year at some level. Or do you kind of see this as, hey, a new system's rolling out, that's a good time to do penetration testing? And then also kind of back to like what I was thinking about with that scanning or the automated penetration testing was, all right, I'm going to roll out a new system. I'm going to hit that system to look for known vulnerabilities. And I'm going to come up with a spreadsheet of here's 150 vulnerabilities I found. And you've got some associated framework to kind of classify what was found anywhere from like low to high and critical. And that the organization would have some methodology to kind of decide, all right, all the highs and criticals need to be closed before we're allowed to go live, something like that. Is that a similar framework that you use with penetration testing, or is it something different than that?
Yeah. So, that is one of my favorite topics. So we call it vulnerability management. So, when you're getting these hundreds of thousands or millions of vulnerabilities and you're like, what do I do with all these? Where do I even start? You'll hear, vulnerability management, and what is your vulnerability management program? Things like that. And so, we try to help clients to figure out how to prioritize those vulnerabilities. So there's a lot of, commercial off-the-shelf products out there to do scanning. We'll just leave it at scanning for right now. But how do you prioritize those? So some of the things that we integrate into our clients' scanning results are their asset information. So do they have a CMDB? Can we help them make sure that their CMDB, their asset database, is robust with information on, all of their assets, what kind of data lives on them, what kind of criticality are they, things like that, that would be part of the equation, if you will, for figuring out how to prioritize fixing those vulnerabilities. The next most important part is weaponization of vulnerabilities. So when you run that scan and you get that big list, which ones are actually being targeted by criminals? That's very important. And if they're being targeted, those should probably be moved up on the list. So it's a combination of it's a combination of the weaponization of the vulnerabilities out there by the criminals and the asset criticality. And then we re-rank how those things should be addressed. Now, getting to kind of when would you do pen testing? What are kind of the, best practices out there, things like that. So, generally, when you're talking about the AppSec world, you'll hear buzzwords like DevSecOps and shift left and things like that. And, it is important that there is a security, like a vulnerability testing process throughout the AppSec lifecycle, and getting those vulnerabilities remediated during the development. It's a lot less expensive to get vulnerabilities remediated during the development of an application than after it's been released into production. So we do a lot of work in helping clients to set up those kinds of programs, and they're continuous development, continuous remediation of the vulnerabilities, things like that. From a pen testing perspective, now there's a lot of drivers for when you might do something like a pen test, or the different levels of pen test. So compliance is a huge driver. Okay. A lot of regulations out there require that a company do a vulnerability assessment, maybe a scan, or some level of pen testing, and it usually dictates the frequency as well. Sometimes users demand testing. So we do a lot of product testing for third-party security products. And those product companies must provide to their consumers that their product has been tested. And so we provide that kind of information in support of those companies that we support, of those clients. And then, we're starting to see, finally, I should say, a shift from it's just like a compliance check the box to people actually care about security and they don't want to be a headline on the news. So they want to know, they want to get them fixed, they want real security for their users and for their data. And then most interestingly, lately, I have seen a big uptick in M&A driving testing. So a lot of acquisitions happening out there right now, and companies they want to know if they're inheriting a security mess, if you will. So are they inheriting a breach? Are they inheriting, poor maybe application development practices without, security integrated into it, or lack of pen testing or security testing, things like that. So that's kind of a really fun space for us because it's very fast, and, trying to identify any material weaknesses that a company might need to know about. We obviously don't make that determination, but providing, that to the company that's doing the acquisition. It's a pretty fun space. Did I cover all of that, Jim?
Yeah, you nailed it. You nailed it. Very important.
Okay.
But I just wanted to ask a follow-up, or it's more of a comment than a question, which is around that M&A. Kind of headline news a couple of years ago was a major hospitality chain bought another hospitality chain. The acquired company was breached, but all you heard about was the acquiring company's name, right? Because the breach may have happened months down the road after the acquisition. However, it takes several months before you can just kind of merge everything together from a IT perspective. So at least I think one of the keys is understanding the risk, right? Understanding what the vulnerabilities are and getting ahead of it from that perspective.
Yeah, exactly. And then having a process for how do you integrate that acquisition into the parent company's processes? So, do they need to be added to the vulnerability management program? What frequency of testing needs to be done? What is already being done? It's having that integration process, which we're seeing. I'm glad you mentioned it, a lot of in combination with this M&A activity. So it's not only am I inheriting poor security practices or an existing breach, then how do I integrate them successfully into my existing processes to ensure we don't end up on the news, a year or so later because we didn't do that effectively.
So when you're going through this process, obviously we're interested in the identity side of things. And you mentioned a couple of things earlier around, social engineering and methods to obtain, access to people's accounts, right? Because it is easier to move around when you're a known quantity versus this foreign account that just appeared. I'm wondering if you can kind of talk a little bit about some of the other identity components maybe that you've got some experience with that, folks who are listening today should be aware of. And bonus points, if you can talk about maybe how a team might go about weaponizing some sort of identity compromise.
I don't know about that last part, Jeff.
That's why I said bonus points.
Okay. All right. So from an identity perspective, and any kind of tips there. So, what we're seeing in our pen testing engagements is most of the vulnerabilities are around identity and access management issues. I'm sure you've got missing software patches and, leveraging those, exploiting those to gain access and such. But, I mentioned one of the first things we start with is, can we get valid credentials? And so naturally, then there is a lot of findings on the identity and access space. So, these may sound pretty basic to some of the practitioners that are listening here, but these are some of the basics that are not, being done well, that allow us to, gain access to data or, whatever the objective is that the client has set. So things like password strength and just rotation of passwords. multi-factor authentication. It isn't implemented, or this is actually a really interesting story too. So one company that we were working with recently had multi-factor implemented, and it was the type where the person is logging in and then they get a text or a pop-up from like an authenticator on their phone, and they have to click agree to allow the access to be given. And we had employees actually clicking accept even when they weren't the ones initiating that request. So it was granting us access to their environment just because they were clicking accept. So MFA fail or what? For really interesting. And the client was like, can't fix stupid. I don't know. Am I allowed to say that? But then you have principles of least privilege. So we see where companies are not auditing or revalidating the need of that particular account. Maybe somebody moves on to a different position within the company, but the privileges that they had in the previous role are never revoked. So they have more access than they should have, or people leave the organization and that access isn't revoked. So some of the most basic things we're still seeing. And we're encouraging, as part of our recommendations or remediation results, is to really, look back at that IAM strategy, adopting that mindset of, zero trust and things like that.
We had Dr. Chase Cunningham on a couple of episodes ago, and one of his key points he was making was that the attacks are moving downstream. So maybe they were, the kind of the high value targets like government organizations, utilities, financial institutions. They've been investing so heavily in information security that it takes a PhD in hacking to attack those companies. So a lot of the hackers are moving downstream, down a level, to other organizations who, there's still value to be stolen from those organizations, but maybe they don't have all these great things in place. And if you go further down the chain, companies are more underinvested in security and MFA, kind of some of the basic blocking and tackling, and those hacks get easier. And while you might not be pulling thousands of credit card numbers or millions of credit card numbers, for example, you can still get valuable data that can be sold and monetized. Is that what you're seeing as well?
Yep. Exactly what we're saying. Right on.
Great. So let me shift topics a little bit. So one thing that I think everybody who's listening is probably seeing in their own workplace or with the clients they work with is that en masse, organizations have been moving services to the cloud, right? And so I'm wondering, when an organization is using a cloud-based service, like a SaaS service for whether it be HR or anything, and you're looking at your penetration testing program, are any of the methodologies that you use different because it's a cloud service versus something that the organization is running themselves?
So overall, the methodology is actually the same. So where, some of the nuances, I should say, to testing, a SaaS application or, something in the cloud is historically you had to go get permission from the third party every single time. But I think AWS and Azure and all them kind of got annoyed with all of the notifications and requests that someone was going to do a pen test on an application that lived in their environment, that now there's just, it's understood that that's going to happen and you don't have to get permission every time. But if you are looking at, smaller mom and pop, or not mom and pop, if you are looking at other applications like an HR tool, like a Workday or something to that effect, we do request that our clients get permission from that third party to conduct that testing. We do not conduct testing on a third party product without that. Okay. So then once we've got kind of those things settled, one of the next kind of big differentiators is the level of access that we're granted. So when we're testing a SaaS application, we often don't get the source code or pretty much never get the source code versus an on-prem deployment. Sometimes we have that access. So the highest role that we have when testing an application in the cloud is maybe like a tenant admin versus a sysadmin. So, and then we also don't have as much access to the developers in a cloud deployment than we do in an on-prem deployment. So we kind of look at it, it's more of like a black box approach. So it's a little bit more, we got to go do a little bit more intelligence gathering and, determining kind of what attacks could we throw at this thing than we were used to seeing in the on-prem world.
I would imagine that open source intelligence, or OSINT, as I think it's typically called, right, is something that is of great value when you're trying to approach something where you don't have really a good knowledge of how something works.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds like that's the way I'm thinking, at least.
Yeah, no, it is exactly right. OSINT is one of, I think, kind of the most interesting parts of pen testing too, and learning what is out there just publicly available. We also have access to a dark web provider, and so as part of our reconnaissance that we're doing, in line with OSINT, is we're searching the dark web for information. What kind of credentials, compromised credentials, are out there that we might be able to leverage? And I don't know if this problem's ever going to go away with people reusing passwords, but when you have that, this is why it's so important to not reuse passwords, is because, it's possible that username password combination has already been compromised and is available in the dark web. And then we can simply lift that out of there and use the same information to gain access to the corporate network.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of products recently, tout their ability to have access to compromised passwords, right? And then as part of the product, they can either flag the user or, prompt them to change a password or whatever it may be, which can be irritating for the end user. But I'm sorry, your email address and that password apparently is already out there for sale, and it's probably dirt cheap because these things are sold in mass, right? I have to imagine that the entire pen testing community has some level of competition around it. How competitive is it, maybe even internally, but compared with other organizations where, is there a cool factor for being able to break something or to discover something? How does your team approach that?
Totally. So I like to say we're like the coolest team out there. There is a coolness factor. And, hackers want to feel this sense of belonging to a cool group of, people, smart people, the ability to have time to do research and do cool things like that. So, that was also one of the reasons that I was brought in, is to really kind of build that culture. I was born in this culture. I grew up, I didn't tell you guys at the beginning, but I actually grew up a hacker trying to circumvent all my parents' rules because I thought they were dumb. And so I get it. And so that's one of the things I'm working on here, is how do we make sure we have that sense of belonging and the coolness factor? Does that, do we get maybe some of our own special colors or something like that? Because it's a very competitive market. It's also a fairly commoditized market. So Protiviti is not looking to be the cheapest provider out there. Instead, we're looking at how do we differentiate ourselves from our competitors? What is the different value that we're bringing to the table that our competitors aren't? And, part of that, or a large part of that, is our people. So what is the investment that we can provide for our people? So I mentioned research time, thought leadership. Are they interested in, writing blogs, speaking at conferences? How can I provide the resources to them so that, they have the job satisfaction and excitement of working here, where they can really thrive? And, I'm a big proponent of, diversity, equity, and inclusion within my team, as well as the greater Protiviti, and, really driving that and making sure that, we have good representation and there's opportunities for everybody to do the things that they want to do within my practice.
It sounds an awful lot like the Jedi. You've got the light side, you've got the dark side, and then you've got the gray Jedis who are somewhere in the middle. I I think you have to have a good, moral compass to not stray too far away from the light side. I can certainly, see some things maybe skirting around the edges a little bit, but probably don't want to go down that way. I know I don't want to leave some time here to talk a little bit about Identiverse and also something that our friends at the Identity Defined Security Alliance are working on, but a stupid question alert coming your way, Krissy. What's the best hacker movie?
Oh.
And why? And okay, let me press this. And why is it The Matrix?
Oh man. So I actually don't watch movies. They put me right to sleep. So
how about Mr. Robot?
Not a good question for me. Oh, I like Mr. Robot. I do watch TV shows. Mr. Robot is good.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. It's a good one.
My understanding is that a lot of the hacks in that show are actually based on real methods, right? I mean, it's obviously probably stylized a little bit for Hollywood, but that there is, some sense of realism in that space.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah. I'd say there is a bit. And I also like how it is based on current events to some degree, and that you can see how things that are happening in our world can be, used in a malicious way.
Right on. Okay, so let's talk about Identiverse first. We teased it a little bit at the top of the show. Identiverse 2021, the registration is open. I do feel like this is typically the best identity conference, at least in the United States, that happens on a yearly basis. I've been to the last several. I think I want to say the last at least 5 or 6 in a row. Obviously, before last year took place. And Krissy, you'll probably be happy to know, or maybe interested to know, that it is taking place in Denver this year, Denver, Colorado, which is, I think, your neck of the woods, somewhere around that area. It's going to be, so they have a couple of options this year. They have an online version that will run, I think, for a couple of weeks. And then they have also an in-person version that's running in Denver. And we were kind of talking before we clicked the record button here that, Jim talked about travel. I love travel and I would normally be all over this, but I'm not so sure I'm ready for in-person quite yet. What do you guys think? Krissy, maybe you start with you.
Yeah. I mean, I am anxious to get out there again as well, but I think, it'll depend on, kind of where we are at with the vaccine and things like that. But I don't know, TBD, but it is, some of the movement in the vaccine space has been pretty positive as of late. So we'll see.
Yeah, I'm totally ready if, depending on vaccinations and how that all works. Jim, what do you think?
I mean, I feel like June is pretty far out, right? That's 3.5 months at least. I think we're going to be much further along, and I'm starting to see people become more confident. I'm ready, man. Like I said, I want to jump on a plane and just fly to another city and go to a hotel and work from the hotel or something, because I'm just getting sick of my own 4 walls. So I think I'd favor in person at this point, but I hear where you guys are coming from. And actually, the thing I'd be worried about the most is if the local authorities decide, oh, you can't have a conference now. So I guess we got to kind of keep an eye on that, whether or not something like that happens, because that's what happened a lot last year, right? There were conferences that folks were afraid to cancel, not just conferences, but all kinds of events. They're afraid to cancel, and then we cancel kind of as it got closer, or postpone. And, essentially nothing happened last year. But, I guess my summary is June 21st through June 23rd, which is when it's scheduled for. 3.5 months plus from the recording of this podcast. So I feel like we're going to be a lot further along by then.
So you take the optimistic view of it. I didn't even think about that concept where you book, you get there, and then things get locked down. That hasn't even crossed my mind. So that'll be interesting to see how it works out. Like I said, I hope things are a lot better, from now. But I think it was rather bold, and, hopefully it pays off. We've got a lot of friends in the Identiverse space. It is a fantastic conference. So even if you can't make it there in person or you're not comfortable, definitely check out the online components, because it's the who's who and the what's what for the identity space for sure. So you can visit identiverse.com for that. And we'll have links to that in our show notes. The other thing I wanted to bring up was something very cool that our friends over at the Identity Defined Security Alliance are doing. And they've essentially proclaimed the 2nd April of the second Tuesday of April to be Identity Management Day. So that's going to be April 13th. And they really want to drive awareness around, the benefits of proper IAM and, really kind of help extol the virtues and maybe highlight some of the folks that are out there. So they've got kind of a whole thing planned where they're going to take nominations for evangelists of the year, organizations of the year, and you can nominate people, you can nominate organizations, you can nominate podcast hosts, whoever you like, for different things from that perspective. So we're looking forward to, celebrating that with that group. They've got nominations open to the 23rd, and you can head over to idsalliance.org for more information on that. Jim, any thoughts on Identity Management Day? You're going to get a cake?
I don't know if I'm going to get a cake, but I did, what do you call it? Nominate you, Jeff. And I encourage anybody who likes their IAM podcast with a side of sci-fi movie recommendations and references, they should get out there and nominate Jeff as Evangelist of the Year. What do you say?
Well, I'm in favor of that, but this is a team effort. So, of course I nominated you as part of that because turnabout's fair play. And, I think right now we're shamelessly pandering for votes. Krissy, what do you think about Identity Management Day? Is that something that, maybe we can set up best IAM breach penetration test, something along those lines to talk about, methods for that?
Ooh, that could be fun. I'm only coming if there's cake though.
I think that could probably be arranged, right? There's ways to shift that sort of stuff around.
Perfect. We need a pen testing day to work on that one next.
I'm surprised that there isn't there's a day for everything. And if you read my LinkedIn posts,
Exactly.
I usually will scour the web looking for interesting things. What was today? Today is National Pancake Day and National Compliment Day. There's a day for it. It's also a National Pig Day. And I was thinking maybe I'll post something around, pig and pigging out on an episode of a podcast, but it's actually about the good things for pigs, right? So maybe I wasn't, maybe it wasn't the right message for that, but I'm sure we can work on that. So I'll take credit for I don't know if it's global. We'll just call it Global Identity Management Day, because I had mentioned, 5 or 6 episodes ago that there should be a day that is dedicated to IAM. So I'm gonna have to ask Julie if I was the inspiration for that. And even if she says no, I might think it anyway.
We'll edit her no out.
Right.
Yes.
It'll be just a very weirdly stated yes that totally doesn't match the voice print at all. All right. Well, I think we've gotten way off a tangent here. Check out Identiverse, check out IDSA. Krissy, thank you so much for joining us. Is there any last words of wisdom that you want to throw out there that people maybe who are interested in pen testing, where can they get started? We'll have a link to you on LinkedIn if you're cool with that. Maybe people can reach out, ask you questions, that sort of things.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm always happy to connect with folks on LinkedIn. So definitely send me a message there and just check out the free resources. It's only a Google search away. I mentioned a few here: hackerhighschool.org, OWASP. Great places to get started. But thank you for having me. And I'm always, interested in making people aware of that you can be a hacker and get paid. So cool. So thank you.
Thanks, Krissy. Jim, any final words of wisdom?
Just a question for you, Jeff. Red pill or blue pill?
Purple pill.
Purple pill. That's living in the real world, but you watch a lot of Netflix.
Yeah, I know what's going on, but yeah, maybe I'm skirting the edge a little bit. Let's just call me a gray Jedi. How about that?
There you go.
All right. Well, I think that's a pretty good spot to leave it. Krissy, appreciate your time. Jim, as always, appreciate your time as well. And with that, we're going to go ahead and leave it for this week, and we'll talk with you all in the next one. Thanks for listening. Thanks for listening to the Identity at the Center podcast. If you like what you heard, don't forget to subscribe and visit us on the web at identityatthecenter.com.